The desert does not care about anyone. It does not move for you, it does not slow down for you, and it certainly does not forgive you for walking into it without enough water. The Sonoran Desert in the south of Arizona is one of the hottest places in the United States. In August, the ground temperature can rise well above 150 degrees Fahrenheit. The air shimmers like a dream. Nothing moves in the middle of the day except the heat itself, rolling in slow, invisible waves across the sand and stone. Cole Whitaker knew the desert better than he knew himself. He had lived and worked on Pete Gallegos's cattle ranch for 11 years, riding the fence lines every morning before the worst of the heat arrived. He was a quiet man, 52 years old, with a deeply tanned face and hands that were rough from years of rope and fence wire. He did not talk much. He did not invite questions. He kept his mornings early, his evenings short, and his past somewhere far behind him, or so he believed. On a Tuesday in August of 2009, Cole saddled his horse at 5:15 in the morning. The sky above the desert was still purple and soft, and the air had that brief, cool quality that only lasts for about an hour before the sun fully arrives and takes everything back. He rode south, the same direction he always rode, along the same fence line he had checked 1,000 times. He expected nothing. He had trained himself, over many years, to expect nothing. His horse stopped first. Cole felt the animal slow and stiffen beneath him, the particular way a horse goes rigid when it senses something wrong. He looked ahead, then down, scanning the low brush and dry scrubland on both sides of the trail. The ocotillo plants stood tall and still. The saguaro cactus rose in their familiar shapes against the pale sky. And then, about 20 feet off the trail, partly hidden in the brush, Cole saw something that did not belong. It was a woman. She was lying face down in the dirt, completely still, one arm stretched out in front of her as if she had been reaching for something and simply stopped. She wore a yellow blouse that was torn at the shoulder. Her hair was dark and tangled with dust and small pieces of dry grass. She was not moving. Cole was off his horse before he had finished thinking about it. He crossed the scrubland quickly, crouched beside her, and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. He felt a pulse, faint, but there. Then she made a sound, barely more than a breath pushed through dry lips, and her fingers moved slightly in the dirt. She was alive. He pulled the canteen from his saddle and poured water slowly over the back of her neck. He said, in a low and steady voice, "You're going to be all right." He did not know if that was true. Her lips were cracked and white. Her skin, where it was exposed, had already passed the stage of sunburn and entered something more serious. He estimated she had been out here a long time. Many hours, at least. Perhaps more. He got her onto his horse. It took patience and effort and a great deal of care. She drifted in and out of awareness, and when she was aware, she was too weak to speak. Cole held her in front of him on the saddle and rode back to the ranch at the fastest pace he trusted. When he reached his truck, he loaded her into the passenger seat, laid his jacket across her, and drove. 34 miles. That was the distance to the nearest medical clinic. Cole drove every one of those miles as quickly as the road allowed. He ran 2 red lights in the final stretch of the town. When he walked through the clinic doors carrying the woman, he gave his name to the nurse at the desk, and when they asked who the patient was, he told the truth, he did not know. He had found her in the desert. That was the sum of what he knew. He stayed. He did not have a clear reason for staying. Pete did not know where he was. He had chores waiting at the ranch. He sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area and watched the clock on the wall and said nothing for 4 hours. When a nurse came out and told him the woman was stable, that she had been treated for severe dehydration and heat exposure, and that she was going to survive, Cole nodded slowly. He asked if she had said anything. The nurse told him she had not yet regained full consciousness. Cole left his phone number with the front desk. Then he drove back to the ranch and went about the rest of his day as if nothing unusual had happened. He repaired a stretch of fence near the water tank. He fed the cattle. He ate supper alone on the porch and watched the sky go from orange to purple to black. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. 36 hours after she was admitted, the woman opened her eyes. Her name was Diana Reyes. She was 38 years old. She came from Oklahoma City, though she had grown up in a smaller town in eastern Oklahoma, in Muskogee County, where she had spent most of her childhood watching her father work long hours and come home tired but proud. Her father's name was Raymond Reyes, and he had been a construction foreman, a careful man, a skilled man, the kind of man who believed that doing your job correctly was its own form of dignity. Diana did not tell the nurses all of this at once. She was guarded in the way that people are guarded when they have recently been through something frightening and do not yet know who they can trust. She answered their medical questions. She accepted water and food. She asked to make one phone call, and then did not make it. And then, quietly, she asked the nurse on duty one question: what was the name of the man who had brought her in? The nurse told her. Cole Whitaker. Diana went very still. She asked the nurse to repeat it. The nurse did. Diana lay back against her pillow and stared at the ceiling for a long time, and the nurse, who was a perceptive woman, noticed that Diana's expression had changed in a way that was hard to describe, not frightened exactly, but something close to it. Something that looked like recognition arriving from a direction she had not expected. She asked for the phone number Cole had left. Cole's phone rang on a Thursday evening. He was sitting on the porch of his small quarters at the edge of the ranch property, watching the last of the light leave the desert sky. He almost did not answer. He was not a man who enjoyed phone calls. But something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, dry and careful, the voice of someone choosing each word deliberately. She said, "Mr. Whitaker, my name is Diana Reyes. You found me in the desert on Tuesday." Cole said, "I remember." There was a brief pause. Then she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." Another pause. "Did you ever work with a man named Raymond Reyes?" "In Muskogee, Oklahoma. Around 1989. The desert was perfectly quiet around Cole. There was no wind. No sound from the cattle. Just the last warm light of the evening touching the tips of the saguaro and the distant mountains going dark against the sky. He held the phone and felt the question sit in him like something heavy dropped into still water. He said, "Yes." He heard her exhale, a long, slow breath, the kind that carries something that has been held for a long time. Then she said, "Raymond Reyes was my father. He passed away 14 months ago." Cole said nothing. He stood up from his chair and walked off the porch into the open air, as if the space around him had suddenly become too small. He stood under the sky and listened. Diana told him her story across 2 phone calls that lasted most of that evening. She had left Oklahoma City 3 days before Cole found her in the desert. She had been living with a man she had known for 2 years, someone who had come into her life after her father's death, presenting himself as a family friend. He had known Raymond Reyes, or so he had claimed. He had been kind and patient at first, and Diana, who was grieving and tired, had been grateful for the company. Over time, she began to notice things. Small inconsistencies in his stories. Documents that went missing. Her father's remaining savings, modest, but real, becoming harder to account for. When she finally looked carefully at what had happened to her father's estate after his death, she found that a significant amount had been quietly redirected. Transferred. Gone. She confronted the man about it. She told him what she had found. He listened, and said very little, and 2 days later he drove her out into the desert near the Arizona-Sonora border, told her to get out of the vehicle, and drove away. She had walked for approximately 18 hours before Cole's horse found her. Cole listened to all of this without speaking. When she finished, he said only, "I'm sorry that happened to you." Then Diana said, "Now I want to hear about you and my father." This was the part Cole had not told anyone. Not in 11 years at the ranch. Not in the years before that, moving from state to state, taking whatever work he could find, putting more and more miles between himself and a Tuesday in the spring of 1989 in Muskogee, Oklahoma, when a scaffold on a construction site had given way and a man named Raymond Reyes had fallen 12 feet onto a concrete floor. Cole had been the site foreman. He had received a report 2 days before the accident warning that one section of scaffolding was weakened and needed replacement. He had read the report. He had set it aside. The job was running behind schedule, and the client was not a patient man, and Cole had told himself that the scaffolding would hold until the week was finished. He had been wrong. Raymond Reyes had shattered his pelvis and his right leg in the fall. He had survived. But he never worked a full physical job again. The injury took his livelihood. It took his savings, over time, as medical bills accumulated. It took his energy and some of his spirit, though people who knew him said he never let it take his kindness. Cole was never charged. An investigation was opened, but the inspection report, the one that had warned about the scaffolding, disappeared from the records. Cole had known, at the time, that it did not disappear by accident. He had known who had made it disappear, and he had said nothing. He had been afraid. He had been grateful. And then he had left Oklahoma and spent the next 20 years being ashamed of both of those things. He told Diana all of it. He did not soften any part of it. He did not ask for her understanding, and he did not explain his fear as a young man as if it were an excuse. He simply told her the truth, which was the one thing he had never given to anyone who deserved it. When he finished, Diana was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm not ready to forgive you. I want you to know that. But I'm not calling to punish you either. I'm calling because I needed to know who you were." Cole said, "That's fair." She said, "My father was a good man his whole life. Even after the accident. Even when things were hard. He never blamed anyone out loud. But I know what that fall cost him." Cole said, "I know it too." In the days that followed, Cole made two decisions. The first was to contact the Pima County Sheriff's Office and give a full statement about the men who had abandoned Diana in the desert. He described the conversation he had with Diana, gave the name she had provided, and offered himself as a witness. The man was located 9 days later in Oklahoma City. He was arrested and charged with elder financial fraud, assault, and unlawful abandonment. Cole later gave testimony by telephone in a preliminary court hearing. He was calm and precise. He left nothing out. The second decision was quieter and cost him more. He called a lawyer in Muskogee, Oklahoma, a woman who handled estate and civil matters, and told her he wanted to make a voluntary financial payment to Diana Reyes as the surviving heir of Raymond Reyes. It was not a legal requirement. No court had ordered it. No one was asking for it. It represented nearly everything Cole had saved across 11 years of careful, solitary living. He wired the money without ceremony. He did not tell Diana in advance. She called him when she received the notification from her bank, and she asked him why he had done it. He said he was not sure it changed anything. She said it did not undo anything. He said he knew that. She said, "Then why?" He said, "Because your father deserved better than silence. And this is the only thing I have left to give him." Diana did not respond for a moment. Then she said, "All right." 6 weeks after her rescue, Diana drove out to the ranch. She did not call ahead. She had rented a car in Tucson and followed the directions Cole had mentioned once in passing, driving through heat and dust on a road that gradually narrowed until it became a dirt track running along the edge of the desert. She parked at the ranch gate and walked to the main house, where she found Pete Gallegos on the porch with a cup of coffee. She told him her name and asked if Cole was available. Pete, who was a perceptive man, looked at her for a moment and then said, "He's at the south fence. He's always at the south fence in the afternoon." He pointed her in the right direction and handed her the keys to the ranch truck. She drove the truck across the rough terrain until she could see, in the far distance, a figure on horseback moving slowly along a line of wire and wooden posts. She parked and got out and walked across the open scrubland toward him. Her shoes were not made for this ground. She did not care. The sun was hard and white above her, and the air smelled of dry earth and something faintly green from the desert plants that only bloom when the heat is at its most extreme. Cole saw her coming from a long way off. He recognized her walk, the slight, careful movement of someone who had spent weeks recovering, but who was also not the kind of person who lets recovery make them slow. He sat on his horse and waited. He did not ride toward her. This was not coldness. It was the only form of respect he knew how to offer, to let her come to him on her own terms, at her own pace, on her own ground. When she reached him, she stood at the fence line and looked around at the landscape, the same stretch of desert where he had found her 2 months earlier. The brush, the cactus, the hard flat sky. She said, "This is where you found me." He said, "About a quarter-mile south." She nodded. Then she looked up at him. "My father was a good man," she said. I want you to know that I believe you understand that now. Not just with your head. With the rest of you. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he was better than me. Diana looked at him without anger and without warmth, just clearly, the way you look at something you are trying to understand completely. She said, most people were. Then, I'm not here to forgive you today. I came to say thank you for pulling me out of that desert. And to see the place where it happened. Cole said, I'm glad you're standing here. She said, so am I. They stood on opposite sides of the fence for a while longer, not speaking, and the desert was quiet around them the way it is quiet in the middle of the afternoon, deeply, completely, as if the heat has pressed all sound out of the world. The man who left Diana in the desert was convicted the following spring. He received a 6-year sentence on the combined charges. Diana attended the hearing in person. Cole did not, but he followed the proceedings through a newspaper in Tucson, reading each update carefully before folding the paper and setting it aside. Diana relocated to Tucson 4 months after the trial. She found work at the same hospital that had treated her, in the administrative offices, scheduling and coordinating patient appointments. She was good at it. She liked the order of it, the way it gave structure to chaotic days. She rented a small house on the east side of the city, planted a container garden on the back porch, and slowly built a life that belonged entirely to her. She and Cole spoke on the phone 3 or 4 times a year. The conversations were never long. They talked about practical things, how the ranch was doing, how the drought was affecting the land, whether she had settled in. They did not talk often about the past. There was an understanding between them that did not require many words. They were two people connected by a chain of events that stretched back 20 years, and neither of them had chosen the connection, and both of them had chosen to handle it with honesty. Cole continued to ride the south fence line every morning. He checked the same stretch of desert he had always checked. But something in how he rode had changed, a quality of attention that had not been there before, a kind of watchfulness that was not nervousness but simply the awareness of a man who no longer believed that his choices existed only inside himself. He understood now, in a way he had not understood before, that what a person does or fails to do continues moving outward in the world long after the moment has passed. That the consequences of a Tuesday morning in 1989 had written beside him every day without him fully seeing them, until another Tuesday morning, 20 years later, placed them directly in his path. He did not have a name for what he felt about all of it. Not quite guilt, he had carried guilt for so long that it had become like furniture, always present, mostly unnoticed. Not quite peace either, because peace was probably too large a word for what remained. Something quieter than both. The feeling of a man who has finally stopped running from a room and has turned around to face what was in it, and found that it was hard, and true, and that looking at it directly was the only thing left worth doing. The desert, as always, had no opinion on any of it. The sun rose each morning over the same flat horizon. The heat arrived, and the day passed, and the sky darkened again in the evening. The desert had existed long before either of them and would continue long after. But on one particular Tuesday in August, in the middle of all that indifference and all that heat, a man had chosen to stop his horse and check on what might have been a stranger. It turned out she was not a stranger at all. It turned out no one really is.